This episode contains discussions of trauma, including abuse and sexual violence, which may be distressing for some listeners. Please prioritize your well-being and reference our show notes for support resources.
Welcome to Sex Care is Self-Care, a conversation on women's sexual health brought to you by the She Plus Foundation. I'm your host, Patty Brisben. Today, we have two really incredible guests, and both of them are really close friends of the Sex Care Self-Care podcast. We have Sarah Klein, and we also have Lauren Hueber. For those of you that haven't met on the podcast before, I know that there's people out there that have listened to both of your podcasts, know who you are, but there are listeners who have no idea. So can you tell the audience, and Lauren, we're going to start with you, what do you do on a daily basis, and who are you?
Hi, I am Lauren Brisben Hueber, and I am a trauma-informed licensed marriage and family therapist who helps couples and systems such as families and also individual clients just kind of come in and heal from any type of emotional, psychological, challenging circumstances to kind of reconnect and learn healthier ways to navigate life. And I do that using emotion-focused therapy. I'm also a mother of 4 and a wife and a woman.
There you go. All right, Sarah.
Yeah, so I am grateful that people like Lauren exist and do the work that they do because I'm on the other side of it where the trauma occurs. So I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse at the hands of former Olympic gymnastics team doctor Larry Nassar. My story's been out there in the news for many years now, and I'm an attorney and I exclusively represent survivors of sexual abuse. So I meet the clients soon thereafter immense trauma for the most part, and I'm grateful again that people like Lauren exist because I absolutely need those resources to be able to pass my clients along to.
You know, I'm grateful for both of you because your work, your jobs are not easy. And you know, as grandma and mom always told me, leave this world a better place than which you found it. And both of you are doing just that. And so if the audience can't say thank you, which I know they're thinking this, I'm going to say thank you on behalf of myself and all of them listening. Lauren, we're going to start with you. You've talked on trauma before with our podcast. Can you give us a brief refresher and discuss how this can impact a person's overall well-being?
Yes. So, during conversations that the two of us have had, I think I've made it pretty clear that trauma is multifaceted. It is subjective too. And basically what it is a traumatic experience it basically is a psychological emotional response to any event, that can overwhelm a person's ability to cope in the midst of the trauma, but it can leave a lasting impact on the body. The body keeps the score. If you don't know that, it's a book by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, one of the pioneers in my field. And, this lasting impact that it can have on a person, it shows up in the way a person perceives themselves, the way that they navigate the world, and even their physical self, their physical well-being. It can leave an imprint on that as well. So Just a few, just to throw out a few, which I know today we're talking specifically about interpersonal trauma and sexual assault. But different types of experiences of trauma would be abuse, neglect, violence of any form, any type of natural disaster, any loss. And I can go on and on about this, so I'll just leave it kind of at that and see where our conversation today takes us, and I'll chime in where I can.
Thank you. All right, before we go any further, let's break this down. What exactly is sexual trauma and violence? What are some of the biggest misconceptions about this? And Lauren, we're going to start with you.
You're starting with me?
With you.
Okay. Well, okay. So basically, I think it just goes back to consent and awareness. So it's sexual trauma, any type of assault, physical assault, is an event where the victim, which often victims will use more positive language and identify as a survivor, such as Sarah did today, which is a beautiful thing. What happens is they are either unaware of the situation being in some way violating, and because of grooming, so to speak, in terms of what we'll kind of chat about a little bit today, it could also be where they are aware that this is not something that they want happening to them. And it takes away agency. So agency being voice and choice. When a person is left in an inescapable position where they are stripped and robbed of their voice and choice, they cannot fight, or if they do, they know that it's probably not going to do much good. They definitely can't flee. So that's thwarted. So they're left to, the brain is left to take over and protect. So what can happen is the freeze response.
Mm-hmm.
So different hormones are pumping in the body, and the brain kind of overrides the system almost, and it can have an anesthetizing effect. What I won't give all the brain science behind it because that will be too much, but there are things that happen in the brain that completely shut down parts of our brain during these traumatic events, which is why trauma is not always remembered. It can be buried. It can be remembered as fragments. It can be misremembered. We might not have words for it because it was so horrifying. It's not in alignment with how we view the world, how we've viewed people, and it changes everything. It can change everything. I don't want to say it always does, because everybody is so different and it's so subjective. And so I want to always honor any client that comes into my office working with me and let them tell their experience. And I don't want to give them the words. So I want to kind of honor and hold space for their words. And so I guess it is just tough. Definitions in general can make this very complicated. It can complicate things a little bit.
Sarah?
Did I give a good overview?
Yes. I have the chills listening to you, Lauren. I think one of the biggest things on my own personal healing journey as a survivor was recognizing that the things you just talked about, that freeze, that confusion, that it was not unique to me, right? Like, this is science, right? The science of the brain. The desire to minimize or bury or protect, to suck it up and pretend like everything was fine, in my instance, for decades, like that is a trauma response that's not just my own fault. And I think a lot of times as survivors, we carry that shame of why didn't I do something then? Why didn't I speak up? Why didn't I get it? Why didn't I even recognize what this was?
Right.
And then decades go by and that just compounds itself. And when I had someone like you, a trauma therapist, saying like your reactions were normal, this is normal, there is science behind the fact that your brain tried to protect itself and do all the things, you know, that it was wired to do to get you through this. And so just hearing you say that, and when I first heard that as a survivor, was extremely liberating and allowed me to even sort of step into a place where I could say, all right, let me start to try to heal. Because before that, it felt uniquely like something was wrong with me. Um, Something I'll add to what Lauren said and to your question, Patty, like the misconceptions around sexual trauma. I think some of the main ones I hear is like people picture there being like a scary guy wearing a dark cape in an alley. Like it's not always a stranger in that dark alley driving a white van. It's somebody that you could love immensely. It's somebody that could be living in your own home, partner violence, you know, domestic abuse, that kind of thing. In my case, it was someone I deeply loved and deeply trusted who was a person in a position of authority. But I say this, you know, every time I'm interviewed about it, like I went to Larry Nassar's wedding, like I danced there. I was a little girl, like I loved him. I loved him. You can love someone and they can be harming you at the same time. And I think that's a paradigm that's really hard for the psyche to wrap their minds around, and a huge misconception about sexual violence.
I think there's so many people that are listening and say, how could she? Why did she? But I think you give a great explanation of how this really does happen. Speaking of which, sexual violence isn't easy to talk about.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm watching you, and there's times I have to remind myself to breathe. And sometimes it's even hard to share this with your closest friends or our family. How can we identify signs or signals that somebody might need some help? Sarah, I'm going to start with you, and then Lauren, I'm going to have you go in.
I think there's a really interesting statistic that will lay the foundation for what Lauren is going to say, but the average age of reporting child sexual abuse is 52 years old. 52 years old. And so then that begs the question, why? Why the delayed disclosure? Why the decades upon decades upon decades? And you see all these cases in the media about people coming forward so much later in life. I personally work on getting statutes of limitations extended so that people who were abused as kids can come forward whenever the hell they want. But why aren't they coming forward? Why aren't you telling somebody? Well, lots of reasons. A, you're a child and don't have the language or the wherewithal. In my instance, I didn't even know that what this person I loved and trusted was doing to me was not normal doctor behavior because I was 8. You know, I have a 9-year-old. She wouldn't come to me and say, Mommy, Dr. So-and-so is not clinically doing the right thing when he says this and does that. Like when it's so couched and you're so groomed for so long, that's one thing.
Yeah.
But obviously there's the shame, the embarrassment, the questioning of yourself. The more years that go by where you don't say something, the more embarrassed you get that you didn't say something. Survivors turn to alcohol, drug dependence, hypersexuality, asexuality, crime, anger problems, medical problems, and the list goes on. But just that statistic in and of itself, really, I think is powerful and can lay the foundation for the answer to the question about what is it. I named a few things, but what is it that you notice in people who are suffering? That could lead you to start asking questions. Lauren, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. You know, there is a lot of shame around this, and the why didn't I do or why did I do? Also, the conflicting nature of sexual assault, especially in the younger you are, you know, depending on the relationship dynamic, these kids need an adult to care for them for survival. And so it really goes back to that powerful component of support that can also be a component of hindrance and further harm, which is in the person you can tell. So the person that that little kid can come to and share, or adult can come to and say, hey, I don't really know, this something happened and it's just not sitting right with me, or this thing happened. It's just, we get these little tiny micro what's the point? What's the thing I was saying? Like little information bites where we just want to hide even more when something like this has happened. And so if you have a person who is not judgmental, who can accept and love, and who is compassionate and empathetic, that can make a world of difference for somebody. But if that, let's say a child comes to an adult and says something happened, oftentimes what I see in my practice is an adult or a parent coming with so much tremendous guilt and shame, or even not believing that this has happened, because the psyche cannot conceive of something so heinous. In the psyche of a mother or a father, how do we wrap our minds around, this happened, where was I? Why didn't I see the signs? And so I guess going back to some of the warning signs, if in terms of what you're personally experiencing yourself, it is going to be anywhere from hypo to hyper arousal. And you can just toggle between the two of them. And let me just break that down. So hyper arousal is like you're irritable, you're like on speed. You're just very aware of your surroundings, noises, all stimuli. You have a vast fluctuation in your mood. And then hypoarousal is where your brain and your nervous system are kind of like, we're done. We have worked too hard all day. I can't do it anymore. And so that's one. And then another one too is disconnection. Like, I'm getting these messages that I should be showing up or feeling or expressing myself differently. Withdrawal, avoidance, sleep interruptions, impaired or interrupted like appetite, whether that's overeating or restricting or not wanting food. There's a lot of different symptoms and signs that could lead to, this person is struggling, this person is suffering. A lot of times when shame is involved, or even a survivor will start turning towards a mind-altering substance or a maladaptive behavior to cope. That will just kind of exacerbate the shame, which will lead to more and more isolation. And so if you have a friend or a family member who you're like, something's off here, like I'm not hearing from them as much anymore, or I've noticed a change in their behaviors. They seem really they could even seem really on one. Like they're so joyful, gleeful, happy, like talking really fast. There's so many things that could point to this, but a lot of it is you'll get that gut feeling of like, something's off here.
Thank you. Sarah, here's a question for you. What are some of the biggest legal obstacles that survivors face when they come forward? And what are some of the things that you would want them to know?
Yeah, so I touched on one earlier, which is the statute of limitations. So both in the criminal system and in the civil system, there are very archaic statutes of limitations. And let me explain what that is. It's the amount of time from when the crime was perpetrated to when the law stops allowing you to file a lawsuit or somebody to be charged criminally. And when I say they're archaic, I'm saying these are traditionally very short little windows where something happens, you have 2 years to report, or 6 years to report, or whatever. And when I stated the average age of reporting is 52 years old, that eliminates the ability for the survivor to dictate when they're ready to come forward, because the legal system is arduous. It's hard to reach out to law enforcement, to make a police report, to do these things. It's really hard to do. It's really hard for us as survivors to even admit to ourselves what has happened, much less put it out there for public consumption and walking into a police station or speaking to an attorney. So I personally work on getting those laws extended and in some instances eliminated. So we were successful in Maryland last year, getting the statute of limitations eliminated. You can come forward at 80 years old for being raped when you were 10 and still, make police reports, file lawsuits, and all those things. And that begs the question, well, how do you have evidence, or how do you prove that case? It makes it hard. But in instances like with the Catholic Church, we have documentation about, where that priest was, the number of reports that had been made before this child, now in their 70s, ever met them. So there are some interesting ways of doing that. But yeah, that's one thing. A second thing would be the he said, she said, the quintessential, well, this thing happened and I was too ashamed to go to the hospital and do a rape kit. I was too ashamed to call the police. I was too ashamed to call 911. So I didn't do anything. And now, it's he said versus she said. And I am devastated to say that the criminal system especially is extremely broken. And high 90 percentile of cases never get charged because of that he said, she said thing. And that's really devastating. And it's really hard to come forward. And when people do, and they're met with that, sorry, nothing we can do about it. That goes on to further damage the psyche, whether they're not believed or whether they're just told, sorry, there's nothing we can do. And that leaves the survivor in a really precarious state mentally to really go forward on that healing journey. So there's lots of barriers. With that said, caveat, I want to encourage every survivor listening to just keep knocking on doors and to keep disclosing and keep disclosing and keep disclosing, because eventually you're going to find that person or persons that believe you, that are going to fight like hell for you, or at least are going to get you to people like Lauren to help you start to walk that healing path.
Yeah. And I mean, just to chime in here, you had mentioned two of the mothers maybe from some of Larry Nassar's victims. You had said something in one of the recordings I saw online as I was like, let me see this Sarah Klein and all the things. But I forget who they were specifically, but you had mentioned that they wouldn't stop.
Yep.
And the whole community had turned their back. They, the community, authority figures, and anybody who was in a high up position, they were on Nassar's side.
Yep.
But those mamas didn't stop.
Mama bears.
Yep. Yeah, we're talking about Athlete A from Netflix. Great documentary, Athlete A. That's Maggie Nichols. and her mom, Gina Nichols, who would not take no for an answer. Athlete A was the first one to disclose what Nassar was doing to the FBI, and the FBI did nothing. They've since been sued and paid close to $150 million to those survivors for burying the story. But those mama bears, Allie Raisman, her mom, was the other one I was referring to. They did not take no for an answer, and they kept knocking and knocking and knocking and knocking. And having that advocacy, those girls were 15, 16, 17. And when they told their moms believed them, and their moms did not stop until Nassar was behind bars and until the FBI and all of those bad actors were held accountable. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Good for those moms.
I know.
I mean,
That's hard. I mean, and what I see too a lot of the times is, various situations, but where the survivor of specifically sexual trauma or sexual assault is so ashamed and just wants it to go away.
yeah.
Like, I don't want to do this anymore, so I don't know. With a 15-year-old daughter, I have had one of those. She's now 21. They can be feisty. And so, depending on what those girls were going through, and like, I haven't seen that documentary, so I'm not sure. But in certain scenarios, there could be the survivor saying to the mother, just let it go. Leave it alone.
For sure. For sure. Yep.
And thank God their moms were fighters and
Yep.
didn't stop.
Yep.
And he got his due justice.
Yep.
He really, well, I think there should have been worse than just spending time behind bars, but that's me. Trauma has a deep and lasting effect on sexual health. From your perspective, how does trauma manifest in a sexual's well-being? And are there symptoms that are often misdiagnosed and overlooked? Lauren, we'll start with you.
Yeah. So, first and foremost, if somebody has experienced trauma or various events of trauma, complex trauma or childhood trauma, this, like I said before, it can influence perception. It could influence the amygdala, which is like the fire alarm in the brain. And so this also impacts our attachment being adult attachment in our romantic relationships. So if we're not getting along with our significant other, our romantic partner, we're fighting, or we've perceived that maybe they're cheating, or we've perceived that they don't have our back, we're not going to want to jump in the sheets. We're not going to typically have that desire to be close, to be affectionate, to be intimate. And it can also influence seeking outside of the relationship contract too, because I think, Sarah, you mentioned this earlier, this can manifest in hypersexuality. And so what is really going on there? It's related to the nervous system. It could also be related to repetition, which is what trauma does. It repeats the traumatic event, hoping to experience an alternate outcome. But as I say that, I want to reassure anybody who is a survivor who has found themselves in that scenario. I want to reassure you and say, this is the brain. Your brain is doing this. It's compelling you to do these things because the brain is remarkable. Its sole job is to keep this organism alive. Yeah. And so it's going to do these things for survival purposes, seeking that alternate outcome. The last thing I want to share is what I've seen in my practice. Obviously, I'm not going to share names or anything, but I had a particular case where a client came in and was experiencing severe vaginal pain. And so this vaginal pain was occurring even with the use of a tampon. So any type of vaginal penetration as small as a pinky. Giving this particular client the resources outside resources to have, medical evaluations. They come to find out that they are struggling with vaginismus. So fast forward, doing the trauma work with me allowed this particular client to start experimenting sexually with first herself to get comfortable with her body, and then opening up opportunities for some exposure, safe exposure with her partner. This particular client, I had been working with them for 2 years. We had made a lot of progress, very slow progress, but progress. They come in, and all of the trauma was associated with this work-related traumatic event that lasted months, where there was a lot of shame and guilt and mistreatment in her workplace. She comes in within the last year and discloses that she had been in a 2-year relationship with a person who was forcing sex. And she shared, it was a sense within me that was just my role, that I was supposed to do that. That's what I was supposed to do. She was in the freeze response every time they engaged in that. She ended up getting out of that relationship, and I won't go into more details, but since we've started working through that, she has made even more progress and has been able to, now her, significant other, they have had penetrative sex. She has experienced orgasm, and she is doing leaps and bounds better, but this is an ongoing process, and facing ourselves, not identifying with the trauma, is so critically important. So, yeah, that's what I'll share.
Lauren, I feel like I'm getting free therapy right now.
Yeah.
I had so many ahas going off with what you just said, just even reflecting on myself and my own journey, but also my clients who, talk about the repercussions of having experienced sexual trauma. One thing that comes to mind for me is endometriosis. I am a survivor of stage 4 endometriosis, 2 pelvic reconstructive surgeries. One of the questions on my specialist intake form was, have you ever been sexually abused? There's all sorts of studies. And when I mention that to clients, when we're talking about how this has affected them, ding, 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 there are the mental repercussions of what you touched on, intimacy, tying, which is one I can cop to, tying sexuality to trying to earn love, right? If I do this, this, and this, then maybe he'll love me. Trying to correct what you said, the brain's brilliant, right? Trying to correct what went horribly wrong is one thing, but also the physical manifestations that relate to sex, right? Just those, the pelvis being what they call the woman's second brain, right? We're holding all of that stress and that trauma right there, and it's manifesting in ways that you articulated in things like pelvic pain, endometriosis, vaginal dryness, the body literally trying to protect itself from having to re-experience what caused the trauma. So thanks for the free therapy, girl. It was really good.
Oh my goodness. I've also read that hypersexuality can sometimes be a response for sexual trauma. Sarah, have you seen this come up?
I see it come up again, and it's again and again and again. It's that sort of equating sex with love
Yeah.
I think it's also dissociation from the body, which is what I learned to do at a very young age, which is leave my body and you can do anything you want to do to it. And I just won't be here for it mentally. Gymnastics, the sport of gymnastics, even in its most pure form, requires you to abandon your body and to be pushed in terms of flexibility and strength and all of these things that are not natural. And so when you learn to dissociate like that, you know, hypersexuality is something that's very, very common. As Lauren sort of touched on, I see it's the pendulum swings sort of both ways. Either I don't want to ever be touched and I will never engage sexually ever. I'll never go to a gynecologist. I'll never go to nobody can ever touch me, see me, whatever. Or I'm going to swing the other way and just, be out there in a way. Both things I think deal with detaching from your body, right? Lauren, would you say?
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, and I think that there's this beautiful, the brain again, this brilliant component of dissociation that it can be such a strength because it does really demonstrate how the brain serves the person, you know? And so when these horrifying things have occurred, the brain is basically saying, all right, let's shut down some circuits here and just power through this. That's what we know to do. But when we're doing that consistently, we're also shutting down so many other facets of the human experience, which is joy, peace, serenity, fulfillment. Um, and so I guess, yeah, in terms of hypersexuality, I think I cut you off, Sarah. Were you still going? I'm so sorry.
No, not at all. No, I was tossing it to you. I think it's my thesis there would be it's extremely common for survivors of sexual trauma to experience either hypersexuality or just completely shutting down and experiencing no sexual relationships, no intimacy, and especially equating sex with pleasure. That's a big one for survivors to swallow.
I bet.
Yeah.
Is it true that trauma can affect your sex drive?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and this goes back to just what I was talking about earlier in terms of when you're in a romantic relationship, if you are perceiving that your partner doesn't have your back, you know, if you have an anxious attachment in terms of maybe it's you're more of an avoider, maybe you're more of a pursuer, whatever it may be, like, oh my gosh, like I need to make sure that they're spending time with me, whatever the anxious attachment is. And then disorganized is just a mixture of those two. You are clinging to all of their behavioral, even just like nonverbal cues to see, am I safe? Do they love me? Do they have my best interest in mind? Do they have my back? And a lot of times you're going to feel like, nope, that's a hard no. Okay. So F you, I'm out. Or F you, don't leave me. And so this definitely impacts sex drive. I want to make sure that when I say sex drive, it is different from sexual pleasure. It's different than arousal. It is the want to, right? And so the want to, I don't know. I mean, it's either like we talked about before, the hypersexuality, where it's like, I'm going to go pursue this thing for whatever reason. But if we're talking in terms of hypersexuality and trauma, it is, like Sarah said, it could be associated with, I need to perform to receive some level of acceptance or approval or love, or to prove that I am worthy. And this is what I've learned is wanted from me. So I'm going to give it, whether I want to or not, because there is that disconnection from the self. Or it is the opposite of like, I don't want to do this because I don't really evaluate that you've got my back and I'm mad at you. And there's so many things that come into play. I mean, we're talking about how we feel about ourselves too. And so that working model of self, if we're not feeling good in our own skin, or we're detaching all the time from our reality, sex is the last thing on our mind. I'll stop talking. Sarah, you talk.
I would say absolutely, right? Like conflating sex and love, been there. Feeling that need to perform to be accepted and conflating that with sexual activity. Like, yeah, 100%. And I see that time and time again with my clients, and really when it comes to sexual trauma, using sex then to try to heal the trauma, but going about it in all the wrong ways, it's something really interesting I've seen play out so often with my clients. Absolutely. Yeah.
It kills me too, because of, we're talking about these gender norms and what is expected of boys versus what is expected from girls, and how are girls, viewed and perceived. And look, this is variable, but working with teens to young adults, even women, I mean, just talking to them about some of the experiences they've had, it is hard for me to remain objective at times, and I think it's okay to show that passion, especially the younger my client is, to let them know, hey, what was happening inside your body. Like I said, I want to prioritize what they experienced, but I also want to put a name to it, not right away, but I want them to know, hey, this seems like something you didn't want to happen, right? I have some clients, some girls who are doing exactly that, conflating sex and love, or approval, or seeking some sort of semblance of self-worth, somebody wanting them. And I could go into a whole tangent, and I'm not going to, but it goes back sometimes, not to blame parents, but it does go back sometimes to that need to be acknowledged, seen, important, valuable, and so, yeah.
And there's a really interesting dynamic I'm sure you've seen in your work too, where the survivor of the sexual trauma is a male client, and
Yes.
they were abused by another male, and then their entire view of their own sexuality is brought into question. I work with so many male survivors, most of them church victims, some of them Boy Scouts and things like that, where that's a whole different angle that they take, where they're feeling like they either need to overly be macho and beat their chests sexually, or they don't engage, and they get multiple divorces, and they get angrier and angrier, and it's a whole really interesting topic of how this affects everybody in different
Right.
ways.
Yeah, and I mean, cultural conditioning too.
Yes.
It's the messages that we receive and how they influence how we move through the world,
Yeah.
and what we think is expected from us, whether female or male, or, non-identifying, gender
Yep.
non-binary.
Yep.
So
There's so much stigma and shame attached to all of this. What is it that we can do to help survivors?
I think we're doing something right here. We're having the conversation. We're breaking down the barrier. I'm very proud to go on national television, to go on incredible podcasts, and to say, yes, it happened to me. Yes, you see this, put together, you lawyer badass. No, I struggle every single day with the repercussions of child sexual trauma. It's yoga. It's getting on the mat every day. I go to a trauma therapist. I do EMDR. I have tried every sort of modality in terms of healing, and to be able to say, yes, it happened to me. No, you're not alone. And, let's talk about it. I think the psyche goes to a place of let's only talk about sunshine and rainbows and the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills because that's so much more fun than talking about child sexual trauma.
Talking about somebody else's trauma.
Somebody else's trauma, right? But it's like, no, we need to have these conversations and really normalize. I mean, the statistics are staggering, and I think the statistics out there are based on real underreporting, but it's like 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men. But I think that's not even representative. I would say when I walk in a room and speak to a few thousand people, it's more like 1 in 2 people have been affected in some way, shape, or form. So why aren't we continuing to have these conversations? I think we are, but it takes brave people to be able to say, I'm going to hit this issue head on. And every time I'm asked, I'm going to say, hell yes, sign me up. And I'm willing to put my deepest, darkest, most disturbing experiences out there because I know somebody's listening to this right now and feeling alone.
And somebody's listening to this right now and feeling not alone because in feeling like, oh my God, if I can come forward or if she can come forward, I can come forward. So thank you.
Thank you.
Lauren, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, the first thing I do want to say is I'm so incredibly inspired and grateful for people who do take it public the way you did, Sarah,
Yes.
and your advocacy work, your life's mission. You are putting a face to this experience. I think that's incredibly vital. And you're right. As we talk about it, even here on this podcast, whether it's on a podcast, whether it's writing about it, whether it's posting something on social media, we don't want to like over the top it. But the thing is making it known helps others feel less alone.
Mm-hmm.
It shines a light and says, hey, you're not unique in your suffering because I have had it. I've been it. I've been there in that dark pit and it's terrifying. Let me sit with you.
And it doesn't have to be public, right? Like I want people to also, you don't have to be the face of it. I just kind of got shot out of a cannon and ended up that way, but live on national television. But no, it can be as simple as a conversation with your therapist.
Yes,
in
absolutely.
privacy, behind closed doors, but taking that first step and having the conversation.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. The hardest thing is facing yourself and acknowledging that something doesn't sit right or that this thing happened. What will it mean to me to share this with another person? And that's terrifying. It can be terrifying until you do it with the right person.
Mm-hmm.
You do it in a way that feels right for you. And it's that first step, like you said. In terms of other ways, I think, Sarah, you talked a little bit about some of the grounding exercises and getting back in touch with your physical self. It's so important. There is not a one size fits all to healing from trauma. And so, reading, taking on and in more insight, psychoeducation, therapy, different modalities of therapy. There's cognitive behavioral, there's dialectical behavioral, there's EMDR. That was a game changer for me. I thought it was super hokey, and then I haphazardly wound up in an EMDR office with a therapist who had me walking through my own trauma from when I was 3, and I stopped being afraid of the dark.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know that I was having this symptom that was still impairing all these years later, my overall functioning because of a traumatic sexual violation that had occurred to me at the hands of a babysitter.
Mm.
And so this can show up in various ways. I think a lot of times in the work I do, it's in what way is this interrupting your daily life? How is it showing up for you? Maybe it's not daily, but is it still showing up? and doing that EMDR work and doing some inner child healing. And I still continue to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I get on my yoga mat and I get down in the fetal position or a stretch. And I tell my younger self the things my younger self needs from me that maybe they didn't get, you know, and because they'll show up. I'm like, how many of you are in there? How many parts of you are in there?
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that. We often hear about trauma-informed care. What exactly does that mean? What is this?
Sarah, you're listed as the first.
Yeah, great. So trauma-informed anything means showing up to whatever you're doing through looking through a certain lens of understanding some of the main concepts that we've talked about today, right? Like, I guess I could call myself a trauma informed lawyer. I never really thought about that before, but yeah, you can be a
There you go.
trauma informed. I always think of therapists and practitioners as the ones who are trauma informed, but being a trauma informed lawyer, knowing the things to say, knowing the things not to say, and approaching things through the lens of, I want to leave you better off than how I found you. So giving
Yeah.
thought to how many times I'm going to ask my client to tell this story, who's in the room, asking them about, a preference of male lawyers versus female lawyers, just being very protective of those triggers and recognizing.
I could see where this would be a class for attorneys,
Oh, yeah.
especially if you're going to do this type of law.
Yeah.
And if that happened to somebody, I would want to go to somebody who was informed.
Yeah.
And put me at ease to be able to tell my story, to talk about what happened.
Yeah. Yep. And I think sometimes I'm the point of first disclosure. I had 60 and 70-year-old men in some of my priest cases sobbing, saying, this is the first time I've ever told somebody this. I've never even told my wife. I've never even told my kids. And so being able to receive that and to nurture the client through that can be really powerful. In a big job, you better make sure you're thinking about the right things when you're doing it, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
I think that, when we talk about trauma-informed care, it's about making sure that you are doing your homework, that you know, like Sarah said, what to say, what not to say. It's non, pathologizing. It's a strength-based approach.
Yes.
And it's also, you have to know that when you're working with someone who has experienced trauma, a survivor of trauma of any kind, you do not want to accidentally or, unknowingly victim blame,
Oh, yeah.
right? I think when we talk about victim blaming or even asking questions that could suggest they are to blame, especially when we're talking about interpersonal trauma or sexual assault, that can lead that person deeper into the well of despair and PTSD and whatever other mental health challenges they're facing, because now you have just informed them
That you don't
that
get it.
can't. Go ahead, Sarah.
That you don't get it, right? I'm thinking that ding, 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 the question, why didn't you tell anybody? I have been asked that more. I don't get it. Why didn't you tell anybody? You could have saved all these people. Why? I don't get it. That is so damaging, as opposed to when I'm talking to my clients, let's talk about disclosure. Was there any disclosure? No. Okay, great. Moving on. And validating, that's totally normal.
Yeah.
I get it. You were 12. Of course you didn't tell anybody, or whatever. But why didn't you tell anybody, Sarah? Asking me as a 45-year-old adult why my 8-year-old self didn't, call law enforcement, right? Like, I didn't know how to tie my shoes, It's just crazy. But that, to me, is a question that's a huge trigger to me. I can't stand it.
Yeah, among many others, you know, and
Yes.
I think like I'm in the throes of coursework right now to get my advanced trauma certification. And what comes to mind in terms of allowing the survivor to really talk about their experience without me defining it is so vital. And my boss recently posted something on our company, our practices social media page by Brene Brown, who I love.
Love her.
One day, Brene Brown and Glennon Doyle and Elizabeth Gilbert, they're going to
All
invite me to their
my dream girls. I want to be in that club.
I'm serious. So the quote by Brene is, in order to empathize with someone's experience, you must be willing to believe them as they see it and not how you imagine their experience to be.
Hmm.
And so I think that encapsulates being trauma informed when
Yep.
you're working with survivors.
So let me ask you this. Do you think since the Me Too movement, all of this about Epstein, even the P. Diddy, which is I'm gonna probably be gone before that's even ever solved. How do you think we're doing in society in supporting survivors? Are we doing better? Are we doing worse? I think in anything that we do, we can always get better, but what do you think?
I think we're doing better than we were because we're actually having the conversations.
Yes.
I think we're seeing so many cases of serial predators because this was an issue hiding in the dusty corners for so many decades. I think those people are now on notice that if you fuck with kids, we're coming for you. And here's what's going to happen. I think we're seeing enough of that maybe we're clearing out some of those cobwebs and really setting a stage for there being repercussions and there being punishment. On the other hand, we're not perfect. You know, we're not perfect yet, but I think Me Too and some of those really brave voices started the conversation in a way I don't think we had seen before.
Lauren, do you have a
Yeah,
take on this?
I agree. I think that, you know, just like the two of you chimed in terms of we're doing better, we can always grow
Yes.
There you
for
go.
sure.
All right. I have one last question for both of you. And I ask this to all my guests. Is there something I did not cover? Is there something else that you want to add on to? Something that might have been missed or some information for the listener out there? Will you share it? Lauren, we'll start with you.
You know, I think what comes so much is flooding in my brain right now, but I think the biggest thing that comes to mind is the way that our emotional well-being or lack thereof directly impacts and is connected to our physical wellness. And so I guess for me, it goes back to having a more wraparound collaborative approach with professionals, whether it's attorneys and therapists or, you know, therapists, attorneys, and medical staff and team. I think that having that wraparound approach can only advocate, support, and kind of serve the goals of patients, clients, so on and so forth, who are survivors of really horrific acts and situations and experiences. Yeah, I guess that's the thing that comes up for me.
I would reiterate something I already said, but I think it's worth saying twice, which is survivors listening to this are not alone. And you might see put together, you know, lawyer in the world doing these things and speaking about this in a way that might seem, you know, detached. But I want everybody watching this and listening to know I still struggle every single day with the repercussions of child sex abuse. It's something I work on. It's something I'm diligent about, my mental and physical well-being. And I want people never to look at me and say, well, she's doing great. She's totally fine. She's fully reached the other side, and that feels really far away from me. I want to say to people, I'm in it right there with you, with my sleeves rolled up, doing the work. And if you commit to the work and commit to the healing process, it's a couple steps forward, a couple steps back throughout the course of your life. You can live a full, vibrant, happy life. But it's not perfect and it's not sunshine and roses, but we're all in it together.
That's
Yeah.
so true. Sarah, Lauren, I can't even tell you, you are both badass women, and the world is a better place because you're in it. And I'm so appreciative of both of you sharing your stories today. I know that there are listeners out there that are grateful, and and hopefully somebody will hear this and say, I ought to see somebody. I want to talk about this. So if it's just one person, we've moved forward. So I want to thank you both. Thank you so much for sharing. If you like what you heard today, please rate and subscribe to our podcast. For more information on the She Plus Foundation, visit the www.sheplusfoundation.com. Remember, sex care is self-care and sexual health matters.